who is our chair. Thank you. So yeah, we are very, very fortunate in Nottingham to have Kusaladevi as our chair. She's a very good friend to many of us in the Sangha, but she's also a very dedicated worker and practitioner. And in the last year and a bit, we've been benefiting from that care and that that wholeheartedness in the way that she does things. And something that I really enjoy about Kusaladevi is that she is open to engage with anybody, with whatever the circumstance. And I think that in playing out in moments where Kusaladevi has been able to offer a space and listening to people in ways that are, I think it's quite radical. It's sort of, it feels like a radical embrace of people's circumstances, that people really feel like they have been met by Kusaladevi. And that's a very beautiful quality that Kusaladevi has. And I feel that that's pretty much at the heart of the way she is leading the Nottingham Buddhist Center. So I feel like we are in very good hands, not just tonight, but in general. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I wasn't expecting an introduction, so that was really lovely. Thank you. Good. So welcome to everyone. And yeah, just a particular welcome to those who have just finished the Radical Wisdom course. So yeah, we've got Kaz at the back of the room, which is great. And then Jade and Rick online. I can't see if there's anyone else for now. There might well be. But yeah, just a big welcome to you all. Really lovely to have you on Sangha night with us. Yeah, so this evening, yeah, so some of you will remember about 6 weeks ago, I launched a fundraising campaign for the Buddhist Center. And Rachel and I had this idea that we'd run it for sort of 6 weeks. And so at that time, I put in the calendar, an event for this evening to close the fundraising appeal. And I didn't really think much more about it. And then it's been quite a busy period. And then I suddenly realized, I'm doing that Sangha evening, like what am I going to do it on? I'm like closing the fundraising appeal. But yeah, that's what I'll start with. I'll start with closing the fundraising appeal, and then I'll tell you where my reflections took me, because they took me into a bit of a slightly different theme that I want to share with you this evening. So yeah, I launched the fundraising appeal to raise money for the centre in regular donations. Because we're growing as a Buddhist centre, the Sangha is growing, the sort of centre is growing. And we have this vision of both growth and abundance. So firstly, just to reach more people in Nottingham who might benefit from the Dharma. But as well as that, supporting and deepening the practice for those of us here as part of the Sangha. And also ensuring that our Sangha is diverse and represents people out there in Nottingham. So they were the sort of 3 strands of our vision. So I just want to say a huge thank you, really, because there's been such a generous response to that appeal. And the amount that we've raised is £512 in regular donations, so new monthly donations, which is really fantastic. That's a really significant amount. So yeah, just to say a huge thank you to everyone. Of course, like the benefit of us having those regular monthly amounts is that we then get some breathing room in a way, and it means that then we're able to sort of reach out into these new areas that we'd like to move into. So if you've been meaning to give to the appeal and you haven't got round to it yet, then now's the time. The link will appear, I'm sure, at some point in the chat box, and Rachel will be sending out just a final email tomorrow just to let you know, but also if you wanted to respond to that. And of course, like anyone who is able to give at a later date can always start giving later. But for the purpose of this campaign, we thought we'd just sort of conclude the appeal this evening. So yeah, thank you so much for just a really generous response to that appeal. And a big thank you to Rachel, who ran the appeal with me, and also Gareth and others who have been doing various support in the background for that as well. So yeah, really, when I was thinking about this evening, where I started was just reflecting on the generosity of people in the Sangha. And I just felt really, really grateful for that response, the fact that people have just very freely and generously given when they can. So I started sort of reflecting on gratitude, and it just led me to thinking more broadly about the mind. And in a way, as well as gratitude, this sort of quality of abundance and inner wealth that we can contact in the mind. And I just thought, oh, it'd be lovely to do an evening where we're sort of rejoicing in positive mental states and the beauty or the potential of positive mental states of the mind. So I sort of approached this quite intuitively, like just poems and sort of readings and thoughts and things kept coming into my mind. So that's why I've got this big pile of books here. Didn't get around to preparing this until quite late, but there was a point, I think Monday evening, where I just went to my bookshelf and was just like, and then just came down to the dining table, kind of staggered down with this big pile of books and thought, oh, these are the ones, like this is where I'm going to kind of get my inspiration from. Yeah. So really what the things that I've chosen are kind of either people or readings or poems or things which sort of carry or embody these certain qualities that I'd like to try and communicate about tonight. So in a way, it's sort of a particular quality of mind that has a very sort of subtle softness about it. And I've been recognizing personally that this is becoming more and more familiar the more that I practice the Dharma. It's like it's more present in my mind the more I practice the Dharma. Yeah, so just like I wanted these readings and things that I've chosen are things that communicate something of that inner stillness and beauty of the mind at certain times, which I know from experience are the fruits of practicing the Dharma. Yeah, so they're these sort of qualities that are the fruits of kind of sometimes what can be quite challenging, that hard work that we have to do working with our minds, and then these beautiful fruits can arise. So what are those sort of qualities that I'm trying to explain? So we did the Metta Bhavana this evening, and of course that is a traditional practice for cultivating positive emotion. Yeah, and really it was lovely actually the way that Aryabhachan was leading it tonight, which I know that is often the way that you lead it, and it's not necessarily the way that I lead it, but you talk about appreciation a lot, which is really lovely because that's one of the things that came to me when thinking about this talk this evening. So appreciation being one of those sort of qualities of the mind. And another one of those being joy. So in the Radical Wisdom course, we spoke about the wheel, the sort of wheel of life and the gap. And then the alternative to that wheel is the spiral. So the spiral path is an alternative to that. And that's this more creative path. And the spiral path actually begins with suffering or dissatisfaction. So noticing suffering or dissatisfaction in our experience, dukkha. And from there, what happens is we start to look for something more. So I'm sure we can all recognize that, this sort of searching for meaning or searching for something more in our experience. And that search for more is what leads to the arising of faith or shraddha. In a way, we sort of see that there is a different way that we might be able to live or be in the world, or even something higher or not quite of this world. We sort of get a glimpse of that. So then the next stage that arises is said to be joy. We've sort of had a glimpse of what we're looking for, and that's the sort of seed of joy that we have in our minds. So I'm just going to read a quote from Sangha around this. So he's talking about what happens when we start to practice the Dharma. We begin to become just a little less self-centered. Our egotism is just a little disturbed. We begin to become just a little more generous and outward going. We tend not to hang on to things so very compulsively. We begin to lead a life which is simpler and more harmless than before. This too makes us feel more contented. We feel more at ease within ourselves and do not rely so much on external things. We don't care if we haven't got a beautiful house in the suburbs or a beautiful car, etc. We are much freer, more detached than we were before. We are at peace with ourselves. We have a good conscience, though there is no complacency. Buddhism attaches great importance to this particular stage of the path, to our having a clear conscience and feeling happy and joyful on account of our spiritual life. And then a bit later in that section, Sangha actually goes on to say, the state of joy should be the hallmark of the true Buddhist. Which is quite challenging really, isn't it? Because I don't know about you, but a lot of the time I'm not feeling a state of joy. But I do know that it is possible. And in a way, that's sort of what I'm trying to talk about more tonight, that is possible. But it's important to say with that, it's not like a forcing of happiness or sticking something on unreal on top of our experience. It does come from turning and facing reality. So from seeing more deeply into how things are, that is how these positive mental states can arrive. So when I was thinking how to describe positive emotion, the poet Naomi Shihab Nye came to mind. So I think she really beautifully blends the joy and the sorrow of everyday experience. There's this, one of the poems that I love of hers is about, it's called Gate A4, and it's about when she's at the airport. And it's really beautifully describing these sort of human connections that can happen between people. And there's just this sense of sort of common shared humanity. But the one that I thought I'd share this evening is a different one. So this is called So Much Happiness. It is difficult to know what to do with so much happiness. With sadness, there is something to rub against, a wound to tend with lotion and cloth. When the world falls in around you, you have pieces to pick up, something to hold in your hands, like ticket stubs or change. But happiness floats. It doesn't need you to hold it down. It doesn't need anything. Happiness lands on the roof of the next house singing and disappears when it wants to. You are happy either way. Even the fact that you once lived in a peaceful treehouse and now live over a quarry of noise and dust cannot make you unhappy. Everything has a life of its own. It too could wake up, filled with possibilities of coffee cake and ripe peaches, and love even the floor which needs to be swept, the soiled linens and scratched records. Since there is no place large enough to contain so much happiness, you shrug, you raise your hands, and it flows out of you into everything you touch. You are not responsible. You take no credit, as the night sky takes no credit for the full moon, but continues to hold it and share it, and in that way be known. yeah, so there's just a real beauty to that. And I think what I particularly want to draw out is the fact of the sort of happiness she's describing that isn't dependent on outer conditions. So your happiness despite what might be going on around. So why or how do we experience these states? Yeah, so as I was saying, I think these positive emotions, as well as sort of cultivating them and practicing, they come about as fruits of practice. So they don't always come when we expect them to, I find personally. They don't always come when I sit and say, for example, do the Metta Bhavana or do a puja, or, you know, when I'm actually sort of having to work more with my mind. But they come at the most random times and sort of sometimes take me a bit off guard. And again, just to say, the mental states that I'm describing are not just about being sort of nice or pleasant, but really touching more on like a glimpse of the transcendental. So these positive mental states that come about when we really see things in line with reality. Yeah, so when I was thinking about this evening, the other thing that came up was some of the poems from the early Buddhist nuns, so the Therigatha. So that verse that we heard earlier was from Aryabhachin, was one of the verses of the Therigatha, the early Buddhist nuns. And I think there's something really simple and sort of free about the way that these nuns kind of express the freedom of mind that they experience through liberation, through awakening. So I'm going to read that one again that we heard earlier. And this is Patachara. One day, bathing my feet, I sit and watch the water as it trickles down the slope. Thereby I set my heart in steadfastness, as one doth train a horse of noble breed. Then going to my cell, I take my lamp, and seated on my couch, I watch the flame. Grasping the pin, I pull the wick right down into the oil. Lo, the nirvana of the little lamp. Emancipation dawns. My heart is free. So interestingly, the word that I wrote about that particular verse was appreciation. Yeah. So there's something about the mindfulness and sort of full presence of Patachara there. So just sitting, watching the stream, the trickle of the stream, or sitting with the lamp, the flame and the lamp and the wick. There's just something about that, the simplicity of just being with what is in a very kind of present way. And I think they're also expressions of the beauty of freedom of the mind. So simply being with the trickling water, the wick in the lamp, the flame. So the word that came, the Sanskrit word that came to me was vidya. So this appreciative understanding or appreciative awareness. Or Maitreya Bandhu sometimes translates it as wisdom implicit in true appreciation, which I really like. I like that. And Maitreya Bandhu in Life with Full Attention says, when we see with vidya, we see that everything fuses with everything else, partakes in everything else. That outside the limits of and limitations of self, everything is interconnected. So I guess that's saying vidya sort of it's not just sort of an appreciation, it's infused with wisdom. So it's seeing the interconnectedness of everything, and that's what that appreciation is. It's sort of really seeing that everything's interconnected. So I was on a solitary retreat in May. So yeah, I started the role of chair in October. So it was about 6 months after that. And that had been a really, a very sort of busy, full 6 months of starting this new role and feeling a bit rabbit in the headlights in a way, and having to learn a lot. And we were doing a lot of our content online. So there was, it's quite a sort of particularly intense time. And I thought, when I go away from this solitary, I just thought, I'm really just going to need to rest. I just need to give myself permission to just like sleep a lot and rest. But something happened. I got there and I just felt totally ready to sort of engage with my samskaras, my habits, my tendencies. And so that's what I ended up doing. I got right stuck in with like these knotty parts of my mind that I usually feel a lot of shame around, and was really just able to sit with them in a very sort of light way. And which was very different from what I expected. I thought I'd just need to rest and then just like, I don't know, just have a very restful, light input solitary. And it wasn't like that at all. I ended up really sort of fully engaging. But I also was going for a lot of walks. So I was at Taraloka. Some of you will know Taraloka Retreat Centre. So I was doing a lot of walks there by the canal, which is very familiar ground. I've walked there a lot. But I was just feeling these beautiful states of like waves and waves of gratitude just sort of washing over me. And I was experiencing, as walking along, I was sort of experiencing dhyana. So these higher states of mind that I'd normally experience sometimes, not very often, in meditation. I was sort of touching into them as I was walking. It was like I was very sort of focused and just very present. So the trees were all around me, the beauty of the trees and the bird song. Yeah, so it was these paths that I'd walked so many times before, yet there was so much beauty there. Suddenly it was like the beauty opened up. And in a way, what was happening was my mind was sort of opening up. So the beauty within my mind was opening up more. So these sort of vast, open, joyful, blissful states. And yeah, I knew that that was the fruits of the hard work and practice of the last 6 months, if you like. It wasn't just, that was just sort of happening. I knew that I'd been sort of putting the work in with my mind, and then I was in the right conditions, and suddenly those fruits could kind of blossom, as it were. But I also was aware I was feeling a lot of gratitude for just being able to be on retreat. We'd been locked down, we had quite a difficult time. And for me to actually be able to take just a week to be in this really beautiful place, to, the privilege to be able to be on a retreat and be in those conditions. So I was very aware of that. So there was a lot of just like gratitude actually to just be able to be in a place like that. So there was this real like aliveness, I think, that was coming out of reflecting on the Dharma. So in a way, like through COVID, the reality of impermanence was sort of closer for us all, isn't it? And suffering has been sort of closer for us all as well. I think it's easy to see that there's suffering around. So I was just feeling this great gratitude for sort of the freedom that I experience in my life and the benefits that I have in my life. Oh, so this bit's going to be a bit tricky. So so this sort of appreciation, there's a couple of particular episodes in my life, well, one in particular that's very poignant. So it's around my mum, who died quite a few years ago. So I'll tell you this story about my mum, but then it's very closely intertwined with another story that might be very familiar to you, actually. So I'll share that as well. Yeah, just remembering, like, for the 2 weeks before my mum died, so she had cancer, so we knew it was terminal. She lived at home. She was able to come and live at home. And I just remember very, very vividly the time of year. So it was middle to end of April. So the blossom outside was just sort of in full bloom, with beautiful blossom trees in the garden. Just a couple of blossom trees that we had. We didn't have loads of trees. But my mum would go and sit on the decking in her wheelchair. We'd sort of carry a wheelchair outside because she wasn't sort of strong enough to go and sit outside. And she'd just sit and gaze at this blossom just for hours and hours and hours. And she was just totally absorbed in the experience and beauty of the blossom. Yeah, so at the time that was very it was very poignant and yeah, just quite moving to see my mum in that way. But then when I came to Triratna, I heard about Dennis Potter. So he's a television dramatist, screenwriter and journalist. And he was interviewed 2 weeks before he died. And I've not actually watched the full interview yet. I've heard this story so many times and I've heard quotes from it. And I started to watch the interview the other day and I just couldn't. Yeah, it was a bit much while I was preparing for this talk. But yeah, he was there. I think he was like smoking cigar or cigarette or something, but he was also, you know, he had his liquid morphine there because he was obviously in pain. He was dying from cancer. Anyway, one of the things that he says in the interview was this. He's talking about the blossom. Last week, looking at it through the window when I'm writing, I see it is the whitest, frothiest, blossomest blossom that there ever could be. The nowness of everything is absolutely wondrous. And if people could see that, you know, there's no way of telling you. You have to experience it. But the glory of it. The fact is, if you see the present tense, boy, do you see it. And boy, can you celebrate it. Yeah, so when I heard that, it was just like, yeah, I've seen that, you know, I've seen my mum experiencing in that way. It's just very sort of poignant that they were very similar journeys, both sort of 2 weeks before death. So, you know, people so close to death, suddenly extremely present and alive to all the beauty in the world. And if only we could live like that all the time. Yeah. And I think that is more, you know, that is possible with practice for us to be more and more present with the aliveness and beauty of the world. So just changing path a little bit. So these positive states arise and flourish out of our going for refuge. And this has to include others. So this isn't just about us and our own experience and the beauty of our own minds, you know, it has to include others. So the Sangha is one of those 3 jewels that we go for refuge to. And yeah, particularly in this movement, we are, you know, we're not just practicing for ourselves, we're practicing for the benefit of others. So one person who came to mind in terms of these qualities of mind was Dado Rinpoche. So Dado Rinpoche was one of Sangha Rakshita's teachers, and he died in 1990. So I never met him, but I've read and heard a lot about Dado Rinpoche. And he just sounds a wonderful, extremely kind and compassionate man. He was always sort of doing things for others in a very practical way, but it just sounds like he just was full of kindness. So there's this really lovely book, A Celebration, Dado Rinpoche, and it's stories of people who met Dado Rinpoche. I'm just going to read a little bit about one of them. So this was Manjushra, when Manjushra visited Dada Rinpoche. So I'm going to say a bit more about Manjushra later. So when Manjushra visited Dada Rinpoche, he asked him, what did he ask him? What could Tibetan culture teach the world at large? And he said, I particularly feel it can teach non-violence and compassion. It's very important that we teach these things to children. So he started a school, an Indo-Tibetan Buddhist school. But he also says this, so he says, people feel that life is short. Because of this, instead of working for others, they just try to acquire wealth for themselves. But if we live in this way, we become isolated. Our lives become like bubbles on the surface of the water. But people can be inspired by action. If they see that something is happening, they start to give. And that is what happened for Dada Rinpoche. He started this school, and unfortunately it's just closed. Actually, this week the school closed. The trustees have decided for various reasons to close that school. But the project to continue Dada Rinpoche's legacy will continue. But yeah, one of the things Manjushra says about being around Dada Rinpoche, he says, being with him was like being gently wrapped in a warm cloak of kindness. Love that. Yeah, I just wanted to put that little reminder in there that practice isn't just for ourselves and to feel good. And I think Dada Rinpoche is a great example of that. Okay, so that's the what and the how, the why. So how do we cultivate these mental states? So obviously the metta bhavana is one of the ways that we use quite directly to cultivate these qualities. And yeah, the positive emotion that I'm talking about obviously isn't just metta. But also, I think what I've touched on as well is what we can do in daily life. So cultivating presence and real mindfulness in daily life. Vidya, so that sense of appreciation, just appreciating what we come into contact with. And katanyata, which is gratitude. I'll say more about that in a minute. But also that joy that arises from contemplating suffering and the faith that comes from that. The story with the blossom, like it just sort of reminds me to be more present and spacious and just take my time more. You know, that's something I need to do more and more. It's just like having space around and between and amongst things. Just sort of taking our time, really, really being present. So gratitude, sort of actively practicing gratitude is one of the ways we can cultivate these states too. Reflecting on what we have. So yeah, those of you that have done the Radical Wisdom course will remember that Aryabhachan always loves that bit in the course where there's the home practice of keeping a gratitude diary. Yeah, so katanyata, gratitude, is about being truly, to be truly grateful, we have to connect with and remember what it is that we've actually received. So we have to reflect on what we've actually received. And I think often we're not quite aware of that. We're not quite aware of what we're receiving. Can't remember what bit I was going to read here. I'll have to have a look at it. Oh yeah, the definition of katanyata. So it's a Pali word. So kata means that which has been done, especially that which has been done to oneself. And anyata means knowing or recognizing. So katanyata means knowing and recognizing what has been done to one for one's benefit. These definitions indicate that the connotation of the Pali word is rather different from that of its English translation. The connotation of the English word gratitude is emotional. We speak of feeling grateful. But the connotation of katanyata is rather more intellectual, more cognitive. it makes it clear that what we call gratitude involves an element of knowledge of what has been done to us or for us for our benefit. If we do not know that something has benefited us, we will not feel grateful. So I just think, oh, that's something we can do, is just really be aware and just notice what and when we receive. And in that way, cultivate gratitude. So traditionally in Buddhism, it said we should be grateful for 3 things or 3 areas. So we should be grateful to our parents, our teachers. So that means not teachers in a spiritual sense, but all of our teachers that have taught us through our life, and our spiritual friends. So yeah, I'm aware that for some of us, some of those might be quite complex relationships, but each of them have given us something in our lives. And Buddhism, traditionally in Buddhism, it's said that we should cultivate gratitude for those 3 areas and more, and others. So yeah, we can actively choose to remember what it is that we've received, or to notice that. And I think with gratitude, it does feel sort of quite exponential. So my experience is the more you think of, the more you remember. And that's my experience when I do the gratitude diary. It's like the more I start to tune into like what I've received, the more things I can remember, and I kind of open up. This awareness opens up more. It's a bit like rejoicing in merits, which is another practice that we do here. So sort of rejoicing in people's qualities. And similarly, I find when you're doing that, you start to rejoice, a bit like Harivachan was with me at the beginning there. You start to rejoice, and there becomes this sort of lovely environment of rejoicing. And often the more and more you do that, the more rejoicing there becomes. And there's just this sort of big cloud of rejoicing in the room, and everyone's kind of lifted by that. It's really lovely. Yeah, I think I also just wanted to touch on the fact that we sort of view the world through the lens of our minds. So I was thinking about the state of contentment as well. And this sense of sort of simplicity and just aligning with reality as it is. So again, coming back to that simplicity of practice, mindfulness, presence, positive emotion. Because our minds do colour our experience. We see the world through our minds. And yeah, as I touched on when I was speaking a bit about being on that solitary retreat, like many of us are very fortunate, and we are in a very fortunate position. So, you know, we live in a country where we're free from war. We have freedom to practice the Dharma. We have food and clothes. So they're all things that we can just recognize and acknowledge and feel appreciation and gratitude for. Before I finish with the poem, I just wanted to speak about the phrase mindfulness, clear and radiant. So I called this talk a radiant mind. So just to say really about my personal relationship with mindfulness, when I first heard the word mindfulness and even the idea of mindfulness, I thought it was really dull and boring and bland. I just couldn't connect with it at all. And now I feel like so far from that. I feel it's so beautiful and subtle and alive. We can feel so alive when you experience mindfulness. So that word radiance for me really touches on sort of that aliveness and the potential of the aliveness of mind. So I do find mindfulness really, really joyful now. And I find that there can be this deep, deep satisfaction in sort of being with and not avoiding my experience, whatever that is. And that doesn't just have to be pleasant. I find there's a satisfaction in just being with whatever's present. So we're going to go into groups in a little minute or so, have a chance just to explore this. But I thought I'd just finish with a poem from Manjushra. So Manjushra was an order member who died in 2011. But he was a really, really wonderful person. And he's someone else who just came to mind when I was thinking about the talk this evening. So he was a bit of a magician. I met him a few times through doing door knocking fundraising appeals, and he came and supported some of those fundraising appeals. He had this quality that was very difficult to explain, apart from if I say something like he was magic, I'm sure of it. But he definitely held this flavor of like a real sort of beautiful, subtle quality of mind that was just he was a very, very kind, compassionate person as well. So it was him who was talking about his interaction with Dado Rinpoche. So I wasn't going to say this, but the very first time I met Manjushra, I was doing a door knocking appeal for raising money for the Karana Trust. And so I met him like on the corner of a road that we were going to go and knock on. He hadn't come to our community yet, but I'd been asked to go and meet him, and he was going to sort of be training me on the doors that evening. And I arrived and he asked how I was, and I burst into tears because I'd been thinking about my mum. My mum had died quite a long time before that, but that day it was really present. So I'd literally met him for about a minute, and I had my head on his shoulder crying for about 5 minutes. And he was so kind and just like absolutely beautiful. And, you know, the reason that I was able to just be like that with him was because he really embodied this total compassion, but also he's just very, it's just wonderful, wonderful qualities. So I'm going to read you one of his poems. Holy. Like many on the spiritual path, I can get hung up on highfalutin metaphysics. But the real test is when I am sitting alone in my car at the traffic lights. Where am I when the signal does its star turn from red to green via yellow? These are, of course, all symbolic colors, especially to a Buddhist. The red of infinite bliss, green of lightning quick compassion, yellow of inner riches. But as the engine misses a beat, is this what I dwell upon? Or is my mind unseen, racing forward to the supermarket, or cursing the pedestrians for being so pedestrian, or thinking about nothing at all except its own gloom? Yet, Blake said, everything that lives is holy. And that includes myself serving time at the traffic lights, lost, out of view of those who think better of me than I do. Okay, so we don't have very long, but I think we'll split here into two groups, one here and one in the shrine room. I think Zach might have put some questions in the chat box. So that's all right. Some questions might appear in the chat box. So 3 questions that you might want to just talk about in the groups. You're not going to have leaders, those of you online, you'll just sort of facilitate the groups yourself amongst yourselves. So 3 questions that you might want to just choose one of them. Can you notice particular qualities of mind that have come about as a result of your Dharma practice? Are you trying to type these now? Yeah. Have you tried any practice like a gratitude diary? And what was the effect? And are there certain ways you connect with an inner abundance, stillness, or beauty in your own mind? Yeah. I mean, I've got them on my iPad, but I don't know how to get them to you. So anyway, just talk about whatever you like in the groups. Yeah, and we will just touch in again just a couple of minutes before the end, just to say goodbye. So yeah, we'll be in the groups for about 13 minutes. Yeah, great. Thanks, Zach. Great. So thank you all. Hope you had a bit of time in groups. It was quite short in groups, wasn't it? We were really enjoying our group and then suddenly had to end it. So yeah, I hope you had a bit of time just to reflect or share some thoughts. So yeah, we're there. It is past. Yeah. Yeah, so feel free to unmute and say goodbye. But yeah, really lovely to see you all online. Just having a look. Who's there now? Yeah.
Thank you for this evening. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you,
Oh, you're welcome,
Kusaladevi.
Rick.
Really
you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye
you.
now.
Beautiful readings. Thank
See you
you.
next week.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
See you next week.
Yeah, see you, Rick.